90.5.
Radio Gold 90.5 FM. Saturday morning it is, and today happens to be the 4th of the month of August 2018. This is Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows, and it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to today's edition of the show. So much on our table to discuss today, but as always, I take the time to take you through the headlines of the newspapers we have with us today. And if we do have the time, we will take a retrospective view of the issues that occupied our minds and the airwaves throughout the entire. On the front page of the Daily Graphic newspaper is the story: Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire to secure $1.2 billion loan for agenda to attract youth to cocoa industry. Cabinet postpones ban on fishing. That's on the front page of the paper. You would also find on the front page of the Ghanaian Times newspaper: President slams media over fake news, misinformation, fabrication of stories. New Ameridio had no clearance from AG and Finance Minister. Teenager jailed 15 years for defilement. Businessman Alhaji Ibrahim leads Ghana polo. And Zimbabwe election results are a coup. Cordeo, clear road map needed on elections reforms. That's all on the front page of the paper. If you check the front page of the Daily Guide newspaper, it has on the front page the story: NDC race begins. 5 vie for president. And it has the picture of the former president John Dramani Mahama, Mr. Sylvester Mensah, Professor Joshua Alabi, and the Honorable Alban Bapin, all captured on the front page of the paper. Stop twisting facts, Nana tells journalists. Law students recite leaked papers. A man kills brother with stick, all on the front page of the Daily Guide newspaper. And finally, the Spectator newspaper has on its front page: man caught on CCTV stealing church money. Editor bows out of journalism after 30 years. And Asabia Copper, queen of her life, captured beautifully, clad in her kente outfit, all on the front page of the Spectator newspaper. As always, this is Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. Here, we do not mince words. We say it as it is, and we bring nothing but the truth to the fore. Also, not allowing for the many tangents that elude others on other platforms to elude us as well here on the show. My guest this morning to help me discuss the issues are Mr. Kwesi Pratt Jr. He is the managing editor of the Insights newspaper. Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, director of communications for the PNC. Dr. Deodat Adenuchi is a financial analyst, and Alhaji Alhassan Esuhini, MP for Tamale North. They would help me discuss the issues thoroughly today, and we'll be focusing our attention on a discussion of President Akufo-Addo being misled to append executive approval to renegotiate the Ameri deal and the ramifications and consequences to our governance system. We would focus on the banking sector and the collapse of 5 banks into a consolidated bank, Ghana. What are your economic challenges, or what are the economic challenges and the future of the banking industry in Ghana? The crime and call of the Vehicle and Assets Association of Ghana that the association was not consulted prior to the implementation of the luxury vehicle tax and related issues. We would allow for optional comment as well if time allows us. The show is live on Sekpele 104.3, in Likwe Radio Kwando 102.5 in Kwando, Lukusi Radio 96.1 in Golokwa, Shine FM 96.9 in Akachi, GFM Radio in London, and you can listen to us live on our website radiogold905.com, and you can also listen to us in Saboba as well on Radio Kitawan 95.7. The show is very interactive, and so you can send us your comments, your thoughts on and your views on these platforms, Twitter and Facebook. On Twitter and Facebook, simply look for the handle at Samuel Ishen GH. At Samuel Ishen GH. The Ishen is spelled ESHUN. You find me on Twitter and then on Facebook. You add me and then you start sending your comments through on Messenger. I'll read them live on the show as the show goes on. The show is proudly sponsored by TT Brothers. And TT Brothers brings you the Ankoti Premium Malt and also the Tango Fruit Juice. We'll tell you much more as we go ahead with the show this morning. For now, we'll go back to listen to some sound bites before the show commences. For me, let me speak to financial analyst Yao Ameko on the 5 local banks that have been merged into, one bank with their licenses being revoked. Good morning, Mr. Ameko, and thank you very much for joining us today on the show.
Good morning, and good morning to all your listeners.
I hope you're doing well today, sir.
I'm doing very well.
Did the news of the dissolution of these banks come to you as a surprise, sir?
Yes, I have to say that it comes to me as a surprise. The reason why I'm saying that is that I think over the last 2.5 years, enough signal has been given to all of us that we have systemic issues within the financial market. And if you look at communication from government and then the Bank of Ghana, it appears that a lot of effort has been going on to basically stabilize the situation. But I mean, this one just casts even more doubt on the entire situation or the risk of the financial market. And for me, that is the surprise. It's a surprise because I would think that we should be getting out of the woods, but it just seems to be getting worse.
Would you describe this move as a positive or a negative move? How would you describe it?
Personally, I am reluctant to describe it as a positive move. Because one of the way I have looked at it, the way I have analyzed it from the beginning is that the government has been more interested in consolidating the financial sector. I think that in a lot of countries, somewhere along the line, you see a move towards consolidation. But typically, these consolidations are initiated by the financial system itself. In Ghana, what we're saying is that the government, based upon what it has seen, is basically trying to force consolidation some way, somehow. Because if you look at the increase in the stated capital that the government basically rolled out, that's a subtle way of forcing institutions or financial institutions that cannot meet these capital requirements to get out of business, or it's a subtle way of basically consolidating the system. So since the consolidation is coming from the side of government, I don't know, or I cannot say that the market itself naturally is approving of it. So I am reluctant to say that it's a positive move. I think what it is that it's just going to create, or it's creating even more risk and uncertainty in the system, because all the efforts that have been made by government so far don't seem to be getting the results that government and I guess clients or the entire nation is expecting.
He has labored, he has suffered.
It's 18 minutes after 9 and the show starts now. My guests are with me. We are starting with the issue of His Excellency the President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo being misled to append his signature for the executive approval to renegotiate the Ameri deal. The issues arising and the consequences to our governance system. That's the issue we are discussing firstly today on the show. My guest, Mr. Kwesi Pratt Jr., Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, Director of Communications for the PNC, Dr. Deodat Adenuchi, and the Honorable Alhaji And Alhaji, MP for Tamale North, also here with me. I'd like to start with the Member of Parliament because the minority raised huge issues about this matter when it was brought to Parliament. And so I'll start with the Honorable Alhaji And Alhaji. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Sammy, and let me say good morning to our listeners, and thank you for the opportunity to be on the mother of all talk shows, Alhaji And Alhaji, once again. It's always a pleasure to be here. Yes, indeed, you are right. The minority held a press conference after we raised a number of issues on the floor of the House when there was an attempt to move a motion for the passage of a new deal between the government of Ghana and Ameri. It's important that in discussing and analyzing these issues, we put it in context and in perspective. And we can do so by first doing a recap of how this all started and how we got to where we had to hold a press conference on this matter, and being told lately that the president was misled to make that proposal to Parliament to pass the New Deal. First of all, there was a power crisis in this country, and the power crisis did not begin with the government that resolved it eventually. We all know that before 2008, Ghana went through a severe power rationing. It was not fully resolved when the NDC won the 2008 elections. So President Mills battled with it. I recall that, popular remark of the late president when he indicated that the granddaughter was at a salon, and when the lights went off, people made references to the fact that he was responsible. And the response of the granddaughter in his defense was, at the time considered an interesting joke. So it moved on to the time of President Mahama, when it got worse. And as president of the day, he took responsibility and did not pass the buck, and gave a pledge to the people of Ghana that he was going to solve the power crisis. The power crisis was as a result of long neglect as far as investment is concerned in the power sector. Now, to make those investments, Ameri was one of the companies that came with a solution. The solution of giving us a plant that has come to be known as the Ameri plant. That was to provide about 240 megawatts of power to help ameliorate the power situation. Now, this deal, when it was announced by the government, was subjected to a lot of scrutiny by the media and civil society organizations. Eventually, many of them concluded that it was a bad deal. Why? Because they argued at the time that we're almost out of the power crisis, and so the deal didn't have to be undertaken, in an emergency circumstance. And because the deal was negotiated under, emergency circumstances, some of the clauses, according to them, made the deal to seem more expensive than it should have been. So they argued that instead of 510 million, the government of Ghana should have been paying about 310 million dollars for it. The argument was that the plant on the shelf cost that much. But the defense of the government of the day at the time was that we were not buying it from the shelf. We were buying it, if you like, in layman's terms, on high purchase. So if you are buying something from the shelf with cash, the amount of money you will pay certainly will not be the same if you were to pay for it on high purchase. So Ameri brought the plant at that cost, and we're supposed to use 5 years to pay them. In fact, the plant was installed and started generating power, and is one of the reasons why we got out of the woods as far as the power situation is concerned. And today the experts will tell you the contribution of Ameri to our power generation capacity as a country. And so it did serve the purpose for which it was brought. Now, the payment was to be scheduled for 5 years, and we started the payment. There were allegations of corruption, underhand dealings, and misappropriation of funds. So the NPP government made a pledge to review the contract, and when they came into power, they
started the process of reviewing the contract. Unfortunately, the circumstances surrounding even the review became ridiculous when the committee that was set up to do the review ended up receiving sponsorship and support from the operators of the plant, Ameri. They had their trips being paid for, hotel allowances and other benefits extended to them by the company involved, and people thought that was not decent, and that couldn't be a committee that will come out with anything good. In the end, the Attorney General came out with a report, cleared the deal of any wrongdoing, and advised the government to continue with the deal. I mean, forget the fact that some former government appointees were harassed, and attempts were even made to embarrass them when the new government took over, and suspected that some underhand deals may have gone on. In the end, we were all told by the same government, who in opposition believed it was a wrong deal, that there was nothing wrong with the deal. So we all thought it was Uhuru until this new deal emerged. We had already paid 2 years plus, at least, for the plant. And so we're just left with about 2 years to finish payment of the plant. And the agreement was such that after 5 years, the plant became the property of the government of Ghana, and we could decide what to do with the plant. Now, putting it in layman's terms, what is on the table now is as if to say you went in for a mortgage to buy a house, and you service the mortgage for 3 years. And just when you are left with about 2 years to complete, the process of paying your mortgage and owning your house, a good Samaritan, so to speak, emerges to convince you that the amount left, say 2 million, is not an amount you can immediately pay. But he has 2 million to offer you so that you can pay off the mortgage company. But you will take 10 to 15 years to pay him his 2 million before you can be said to be the owner of that house. So imagine you have just 2 years to finish paying. And then someone comes to say, I'll pay the 2 million for you, but you will now take 15 years to pay the 2 million on interest. Now, the interest worked on the 2 million will mean that by his proposal, your debt will now increase to about 15 million. So instead of being left with 2 million to finish paying in 2 years and own your house, you are now saddled with a new debt of about 15 million. That will take you 15 years, before you can own the house. It's simply unthinkable, it's simply unreasonable, and especially so because these were the same people who initially argued that the agreement for 5 years, which made it possible for Ghana to have to pay $510 million, was a bad deal. So it beats any right-thinking Ghanaian, the imagination of any right-thinking Ghanaian. Why the same people who thought that an agreement for 5 years that will cost us 510 million, and grant us the opportunity to own a plant like the one Ameri has installed is bad. But they get the opportunity and they extend it to 15 years and increase the amount to about $1 billion US. I mean, it was something that as a minority we couldn't even understand why the government will consider such a proposal in the first place, or go into a negotiation and reach such an agreement. It flies in the face of all the positions they took when they were in opposition about this deal. And to say that the president was misled is quite scary, I mean, because you're talking about the commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces. And how safe are we and how sure are we that this is the first time our president has been misled and this will be the only time he will ever be misled? How safe are we? Commander-in-chief can declare war on another country, and if he has the propensity to be misled in the manner that we are told he was misled, then our security as a nation is not, even that secured. And that brings to mind the deal, in fact, maybe many other deals, but one that immediately comes to mind is a deal with the United States of America. We discussed it extensively in this studio, and at the time I was already of the view that the president either had not read the agreement, was misinformed, or was just being, intransigent for nothing. Because anybody who read that agreement would have come to the realization that the concerns that were raised by the people of Ghana at the time were genuine concerns, and they were not just raised, as he put it, as professional propagandists. And that again is another worry. The fact that a man who has lived the better part of his life criticizing people in authority seems to show so little tolerance for criticisms. And every time he is criticized, he retorts with unpalatable adjectives against the people who criticize him. Meanwhile, for the better part of his life, he has been a critic. For most part of his life, he's been a critic until now that he's president. So it beats my imagination, and it makes me wonder if this is the only time that our president has been misled. Remember the bust scandals. Remember the 2.2 billion bond which Shraj itself has revealed was not done properly, and many other agreements like the Kelny GVG and others. Now, you had him come to Parliament to praise the people who were involved in all these deals and said they were assets to the nation and gave them very flowery adjectives. I mean, I think that the attempt to whitewash the president will not work. I think that if indeed he was misled, like they want us to believe he was misled, it only, points to what the people of Ghana should have considered more seriously before electing him to the high office of president. I mean, in the WikiLeaks report, for example, he was said to be someone who was not thorough. He's a man who is not organized. He's not thorough and he's not organized. So do you get surprised that things like this will be happening when he is president? I don't get surprised, because that perhaps was a very good assessment of his character and how he handles tax that he is giving. Anybody who followed the discussions around Ameri at the time and heard what Dr. Bawumia said about Ameri being, an example of a corrupt arrangement, and heard even the president himself and what he said about the Ameri deal at the time, obviously is left shocked that the president and his appointees will present such an agreement that will lead to, burdening the already burdened taxpayer. Instead of us, just paying 2 years to own the plant, we are extending it for 15 years and increasing our debt burden for that, 15 years. From 510 million, now it is less, to about 1 billion US dollars. And I don't buy that suggestion that he was misled. I think it is just, what it is. The fact that we're already cautioned that he's not a thorough person and he is not, an organized person. Because being a president is not a walk in the park, especially in a developing country. And you will expect him to be on top of all these issues. So to have a letter that shows that he gave executive approval to this deal, only to turn around to want people to believe he was misled, is a serious indictment on his, ability to govern. Very, very serious indictment. So either way, he can't win. An executive approval procured from the president of Ghana through misinformation, and whoever perpetuated or led him to undertake that act has not even been sanctioned. I think that the president and the NPP administration should just admit that they were caught pants down. They were caught trying to steal from the people of Ghana. And they are beating a retreat. They are simply sorry because we found out. They are not sorry because they were misled. They are sorry because we found out. The people of Ghana, the minority in parliament, civil society organizations found out and exposed them. And it is so embarrassing that they have to beat a retreat. But in beating that retreat, they want to blame it on human failings. I don't think it is something that is acceptable. But I have also seen an attempt by propagandists of this government and associates of this government to say that is an example that the government is a listening government. And so if they eventually do as it is reported, if they eventually retrieve the agreement from Parliament and cancel it as it's been suggested, then they deserve some praises. For listening and for correcting what they were caught attempting to do. I don't think it is. I don't think they deserve any commendation or any praise at all. And I say so based on our history as a country. I don't remember any government ever getting praised and commendation from these same people for correcting a situation. I don't. These same people have never given credit to any government that has corrected a situation. I'll give you just two examples. There was a bus branding in this country. The critics, including the opposition, raised issues with the cost of the bus branding. The government of the day, led by the president, listened to those criticisms. And the president, by virtue of those criticisms, accepted the resignation of his minister, instituted an investigation into the whole bus branding saga, and agreed with the critics that the cost of the exercise was inflated, and so monies were retrieved. Yet at no point did these people commend that president and government for being a listening government. They took those actions as vindication of their case, and lambasted and ridiculed and hounded that president for listening to them. So why should it be different now, if indeed they eventually pull this deal? Because I am still not convinced that they will. I think it is all propaganda, it is all talk. But even if they do eventually, they have no right or no justification to request for credit from the people who caught them when they attempted to perpetrate this fraud. The second example is JIDA. JIDA became a topical issue in this country because of the work of a journalist and civil society groups expressed concern. The president and government of the day looked at the issues and realized that there was no legal framework that set up JIDA. And that absence of a legal framework made the whole program susceptible to the corrupt deals that were uncovered. What did the president do? Immediately, contracts under that program were cancelled. Monies were retrieved. Prosecutions were started. And a legal framework was promulgated through Parliament to re-establish the JIDA program now here and to insulate it from corrupt deals. Not once did these people who are now claiming credit pat that government on the back and congratulated the government for taking those steps to rectify a bad situation. So why should it be different now? Why should they be running over themselves to claim credit because they attempted to perpetrate fraud and the people of Ghana caught them and they are beating a retreat? And so because of that, we should bow and commend them. I don't think they deserve any commendation if they eventually do what is speculated. Because as we speak, it remains a speculation. What we know currently is that there is a deal before Parliament. That deal was not passed because the minority raised concerns with that deal and objected to its passage, and somehow got some of the leadership of the majority to call for a difference, for the deal to be considered on a later date because Parliament was rising. So it's not correct to say that the deal has been pulled off as we speak, because it hasn't been pulled off. It is still before Parliament. The minister who laid it has not gone back to Parliament to retrieve the deal. So as we speak, that bogus, fraudulent deal is still what we have from our government, which has taken 18 months to arrive at this deal. 18 months. It couldn't have just been, a simple oversight. That took them 18 months to prepare. So I think whatever credit is sought is unreasonable, is unthinkable. It's just not going to be tolerated and accepted by us. We are happy as a people, especially in the minority, that at the end of the day, the Ameri deal was not a bad one. The one that was entered into by the NDC was not a bad one. Indeed, it was one that saved us from the energy crisis, and it is one that is going to make us another power plant rich at the end of 2 years. And every nation knows the value of power, even if you have it in excess, because of its contribution to the industrial takeoff that we have all, been anticipating.
All right.
And just by way of wrapping up, I do not think for a moment that this government will even consider. I did not think that they will even consider extending this deal. The amount that is left, even though I hear they are even in arrears, cannot be justified if we argue that we can't pay it. Because we know some of the things that we have used our money to do in the last 18 months. We know of the Kelly GVG and how much we pay them, $7 million a month, when they have not even started doing any work. we know of the useless, hopeless, and I can't find more adjectives, GPS, that we expended so much money on and gaining so little from. So this is not a government that doesn't have the money to finish paying for the plant as agreed by the previous government. They have the money. They are simply wasting what they have on deals such as the Kelny GVG deal and the Ghana Post and many, many others.
Thank you very much, Honorable Alhassan S. Suhini, for your contribution this morning. That brings us to 15 minutes to the top of the hour 10. This is Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. You're welcome if you just join us. We started the journey around 9-6 thereabouts. I'll move on straight to Dr. Deodat Adenuchi for his views on our first issue. Come on, Doc.
Good morning, and good morning to our listeners. Today, I am very sad again by the way our presidency is trying to put all of us, our life at risk. In fact, even the life of the generation yet unborn, as far as our economic prospects are concerned. In the first place, continuing from where Honorable just landed, the issue about information, misinformation, or not informing is becoming too rampant under this government. And if this is anything to go by, how sure are we? For instance, how sure are we that the president was well informed when it comes to the dismissal of the EC boss, Charlotte Osei, and his two deputies, and even the appointment of the new ones? This is coming across my mind because you will recall that during the inauguration of the president, his speech was allegedly plagiarized, and the evidence was there for everybody to see. His defendants came, or his communicators came to his defense to say that this president, we should know that, was not the one who wrote the speech, and for that matter, he might have not actually be conversant with the content of the speech. And this is somebody who has been seeking presidency since 1992, if my mind serves me right, but at least in the 90s. Leaving that aside, you remember this cash for seats saga. The presidency and his communicators came quickly to say it happened at the blind side of the president. Ameri has come to the fore. Contemplated fuel has passed by similarly. So now, if these things are the way that the presidency with 110 ministers of state that we are paying, and with the largest workers, or let me say civil servants, within the Flagstaff House that we are paying for our tax, are going to act, then really I don't know what the future holds for us as a country, now that we are talking about trying to save costs and use it to finance some of our social inclusive projects like free HSS and things like that, which are even in debt. It is so sad. Now let's look at the whole deal that we were told that was bad, and efforts are being made by the new government to improve. The deal that was signed in 2015 would have cost Ghana, or as it is, 510-023-5450. In other words, we're talking about $510 million. That would have been the total cost in present value in 5 years' time. Then, under the proposed renegotiated contract, we are now in millions. In fact, in billions, I should say, in billions. 1 billion, 35 million, 6,790 is what Ghana would have been paying in 15 years. And that is the present value, which means by the time we finish paying, it will have been more than that, because this present value, not the future value. And that is quite frightening. And I'm very worried because this is something that the current government used as a campaign tool and actually discredited the government at that time. And said when they come, these are some of the things that they are going to look at. So this is supposed to be a corrective measure. It's just like you have done a take-home assignment, and your teacher tells you that something was not properly done, go and do it again. And now you went to commit more errors than before. And you are not doing this under any duress. You are not doing it under any pressure. Let's even assume in 2015, the then government was under pressure to do something quickly to solve the energy crisis because the following year was an election year. So for that matter, certain things could be an oversight. You are not in a haste under that same environment, political environment. So I was expecting the government to really do good work. Now, so for all this while, who led this team for the discussion? Honorable may tell us one of these days, if he doesn't have it now. Because there is a clear evidence of crony capitalism under this government. If you look at the people who are leading this renegotiation, you can have close relations between members of that team and even the governor of the Bank of Ghana, the second thing we are going to discuss. All in all, after incurring all these debts, we have rather renegotiated 100% increase. In other words, higher, double the price, what we should have done. Taking a bigger risk of the generation even yet unborn for the next 15 years instead of 5 years, which have even gone halfway through. So, my brother, as for this one, I think that the presidency will just have to come and apologize to us and probably just dismiss any effort of renegotiating this deal, because I can't see any better light at the end of the tunnel, even if they should withdraw this and say they are going to do any renegotiation at all. Now, this is the base of my submission. It is because, Sammy, assuming this was not a mission to renegotiate a contract, in other words, assuming this was a new contract, how will we have known that this would have been the magnitude of overinflation of the entire deal? In other words, improper negotiation of a deal. Let's assume, well, it may not be inflation of the deal. That's one thing we have to be cautious about. It may not necessarily be because the figures have inflated. Of course, if you look at the components that arrive at the 1.2 billion that I've just mentioned, 1.1 billion US dollars, as it is in front of me. Indeed, it is not because the figures, the little figures in components have been increased, but it is because you are compounding for 15 years. Well, does not make sense. 15 years rather than 5 years. You are thinking about short-term, long-term deals that you can deal within a scope of time. And this is already something that has started. So if you want to renegotiate something better, of course, then we want this price to be far, far, far lower than it is. And indeed, in present value, it's clear that this is a bad deal because we are not even talking of the future value here. Now, so, in the first place, we have to applaud civil society, the think tanks, and the minority for trying to raise this issue. And I'm very happy that the presidency has been under pressure. Of course, like I said, they are compelled to listen because now there are two proposals on table. The earlier proposal and the proposed one. In fact, or the current deal, the current contract, and then the proposed one is here. So everybody can see, everybody can compare. That is why it appears as if the government is under pressure or government is appearing to be listening because they have almost no choice. You will recall that even ASEP, everybody knows ASEP's political inclination, Amid Mohammed and all that. They are all NPP guys. The founders of these guys are all complaining. In other words, they've also issued statements condemning this very new deal. So even within the governance structure itself, or the party itself, there are people who have acknowledged that this is worse deal than the existing contract. Now, so as far as I'm concerned, this Ameri deal should be suspended entirely. There should be nothing about even going to renegotiate because that will only increase our tax burden again as far as the cost implications are concerned. So now I'm asking, so for these costs that have been incurred, yes, we know that Ameri has been responsible for some of the costs, but is that all? Does it mean that the government of Ghana did not incur any cost at all in this renegotiation? And if so, what is the moral implications of that? That you are going to negotiate a contract with somebody that you claim has given you a contract that you don't like, the terms, and a different regime, then you are going there and you can't even contribute to the pot. of the entire bill, then this must be really a question of morality, and we need to interrogate that issue quite well. This appears to be a financial coup, and we need to be very, very, very much interrogating as far as this is concerned. Now, I am not sure that the president has been misinformed, because earlier on, it used to say that the president was not informed at all. Like the cash for seed, they say the president was not informed. The contaminated fuel, they say happening at the blind side of the presidency and all that. Now, if the president is not informed, who is in charge of the economic management of this team? It's obviously the vice president. And the vice president, the structure that we have, those who swear to us. Indeed, people are calling for the minister to resign. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not worried about that. The minister did not swear any oath to us. It's the president. The minister swore an oath to what? The president. And the president swore to we, the Ghanaians. So if this deal was actually assented to by the president, then if you want to call for somebody's head, it should be the president. It should be the president, because he has a contract with us. And he decided to appoint teams to work with him. So if you really want to call speed for speed and to go according to this virtue or the principle of this practice, then it's the president that we should be calling to probably do the honorable thing, which you and I know is far from being done or cannot even be tolerated. But then, if the president, with all this number of ministers, including his vice president, who is supposed to be in charge of economic management, and indeed who has actually demonstrated that he is very competent than the previous vice president and all that, as far as economics is concerned, the experience is concerned, the funds are there. I will not be. In fact, I cannot admit that excuse that the president has been misinformed. It is only that because we have this contract going on, signed earlier on, and this one being renegotiated, and it was, the evidence has shown that it is higher, and the two everybody can see, daytime robbery or daytime incompetence or daytime uncoordinated governance structure, the president is under pressure to think that, well, if that's the case, he has to probably withdraw this and consider that. Now, Honorable just made us know that even this has not yet been withdrawn. It's just a process, it's just a thought. I think that our civil society groups and media and the experts that are there, all of us, the think tanks, we should continue to put pressure on government so that another look will be taken at this. In fact, I'm even saying that there should not be another look at all. This whole thing must be cancelled altogether. To save cost, we need money and we need time. We need the human resources. Even if Ameri is putting the bill, we need the human resources of Ghana, all of us to come on board to see how we can work together to raise more taxes, to fund the free HSS, and to fund the building of school structures that we are not even too sure that our children are going to have access to when school resumes in September. People should not just be going on tour, international tour, just to have fun, to go and drink coffee, come back without any good results. So it's an affront to our democracy as far as this is concerned, and it's just similar to a financial coup, another dimension of chronic capitalism, because I will not admit that the president has not been. He's well informed, just that there is a problem as far as this has been concerned, and the evidence is there. And if the president claims that he's not informed, then as a lawyer, I'm surprised, and I'll feel sad that he'll be signing contracts without asking anybody to inform him on the terms of the contract. That's my submission.
Thank you very much for your submission, Dr. Deodat Adenuchi. Brings us to 10 a.m. on the dot. If you just join us, this is Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. I'll come straight to you, Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, for your thoughts on this matter we've been discussing today. Good morning.
Good morning, Sammy, and good morning to my senior colleagues and brothers here. A special morning to our listeners and our viewers also. Sammy, it is really important to appreciate that governance is no joke. When we are talking of governance, we are talking of not just the economy, we are also talking about individual lives that are at stake, human beings. And so if a government decides not to, or those in charge of governance decide not to do what is right, they may not only be weakening the foundation of the economy. What they will be doing, which for me is very crucial and important to acknowledge, is that they are going to play with the lives of individuals. And so anytime we are talking of governance, we are talking of something that is very important and we need not play with. So Himi has given a detailed explanation of what the Ameri deal is all about, and I wouldn't want to go over it. I will rather want to spend my discussion or my time on 3 issues that bothers my mind. The first one has to do with the think tanks, the so-called energy experts, reputable institutions that were all hailing the renegotiation of this Ameri deal. And I am worried, and I keep asking myself, on what premise were these institutions and individuals backing this renegotiation? Particularly when it is becoming obviously clear that the position of the president, and for that matter the MPP government, with regards to the renegotiation, there was the strong lacking of due diligence. In other words, they did not really get the information that they needed to get. So on what premise were, if not even the president, on what premise were those so-called experts backing the renegotiation deals? In 2017, you could hear the whole country director of World Bank, Henry Kerali, stating that the review is very good, and as far as he's concerned, the review is rather going to save this nation a whole lot of money. There are other individuals who also went on to say the same thing. The committee that was set out, and Doc was asking who was leading the committee. The committee that was set up to review was led by lawyer Philip Addison. Now, Philip Addison, in his initial states of the activities of the committee, indicated that clearly the country was shortchanged in commission levied by the power company. And so, as far as the committee is concerned, there is a strong need to renegotiate, because the initial negotiation is puts the whole nation in a position that will not be beneficial to us. And it goes on, and it goes on, it goes on. The committee also raises concern, and it says that it is the initial negotiation is going to also burden the taxpayer, and so there's also a need for us to renegotiate. And so the question I keep asking myself is, all these individuals, all these institutions, particularly with the World Bank, because I am expecting and believing that the World Bank, as we all know, should have been in a position to be well informed than any other ordinary person, on the street. And so for the World Bank to also take a position that it is really good and we need to look at it, encouraging the president and encouraging the MPP government on, encouraging the Ministry of Finance on, and encouraging all those that matters in this to go and look into the initial agreement and to renegotiate. It is a worry to me, and I'm sure it is really a worry to a lot of individuals. The other thing that bothers my mind has to do with the president coming out proud to he being elected on so many platforms, condemning the fact that previous governments have not been able to protect the public purse. And so as his commitment, when he becomes the president, he's going to protect the public purse. And indeed, his very first statement or first official address he made when he was being sworn in as in president, he reiterated the same point, that he's in to protect the public purse. Now, in protecting the public purse, the impression is that he's going to do anything and everything possible for us to have value for money with regards to anything and everything that he will be doing and he will be engaging in. If this is so, I ask myself, since Philip Addison's committee was set up, with the work that the committee has done throughout, probably from 2017 till date, does it mean that the cost that has been incurred by the committee is gone waste? Who paid for those costs? It is clearly the taxpayer that paid for it. And so if it is so, where stand the position of the president that he's in to protect the public purse? If you want, and you are saying that you are in to protect the public, I am very sure that there has been instances where this committee have to travel from one point to the other. I'm very sure there are instances where this committee have to be in a hotel and all that. I am very confident this committee, anytime they meet, they take what they call certain allowance. I am also very sure that when this committee meets, there are instances where they will be refreshed. Now, what is even alarming is not just the committee, but the minister. I know for a fact there has been instances where the minister is not in his office to do other things, but will be out, and you go to his office and you are told that he's gone for meetings, and all these meetings are in line with the renegotiation of this Ameri deal. And these are all parts of causing financial losses. Because if you invest so much in the work of the committee, the minister decides to take off his time, official time, to also engage in activities in line with this renegotiation. And it so happens that, look, they did not even have any basis to start all this renegotiation. I keep asking, what then happens to all the cost that has been invested in these processes? Is it the way the president, or is this what the president meant when he said that he is in to protect the public purse? There are thousands of examples, but then it is very clear, and it is becoming extremely clear to me that this is a president who doesn't really believe or understand the promises and the comments that he has made before and he is even making now. It is very clear that the president, anytime he makes comments or promises, he is not really making them based on intellectual information, but he's probably making them based on political emotions. And that is very dangerous as a nation. Very, very dangerous. If you have a president who decides that, okay, I move to this community, and I think that if I say A, B, C, D, I'm going to be hailed politically, then let me say it. And after saying it, because he is not so honest, he comes back and he decides that by every means necessary, let me try to let the public see that I am committed to what I said. Even if it will be detrimental to the entire nation, I will still want to go about it and do it. And that is why I am beginning to get so worried that from 2016 to 2020, if we do not take care with this character that the president seems consistently to be exhibiting, if we do not take care, we will go into the 2020 elections, and after a changeover has taken place, of governance has taken place, the foundation of this nation will be so weakened by the MPP government that it will be extremely difficult for us as a nation to make any headway. You remember just some few weeks ago, the finance minister came out to admit that this free SHS is not working. We need to relook at it. And then some days after, Gabi Ochredakun decided to attack the finance minister through a post that he posted on his Facebook wall. And just after Gabi Ochredakun, some other spokespersons of the Flagstaff House and the presidency have also come out to indicate that, look, what the finance minister said is not it's not really so, and that this government is committed and it's going to do everything possible to ensure that this free SHS is going on. I'm saying this to buttress the point that the president makes decisions that are not intellectually informed. And so when he makes politically emotional decisions, even if it is very clear that things are not going well, he still wants to pretend and do everything possible to create the impression that things are going to go well. Without he first having any due diligence done, he just decides that, look, this is what the populace want, so let me just say it to excite them. It is also becoming very clear that the president did not really have any strong plans with regards to the development of this nation. The president was just being influenced by the quest to be a president, to be called a president. And so that is why he just decided to say anything and do anything and everything, as long as those things are going to win him votes to be in this country, to be the president of this country. The very final thing that also bothers my mind, and for me it is strongly of a worry, is when the president came out to indicate that he was misled. The president, you see, fortunately or unfortunately, and I am one person who has advocated on so many platforms that we need to take a stronger look at our 92 Constitution again. Under the late former President Atta Mills, there was a Constitutional Review Committee. Unfortunately, it didn't really, whatever work they did hasn't really gotten to its final destination. And so the Constitution is still as it is. And that I even have a worry also at. You know, we are in a state or a country where we believe so much in wastages. That review committee, I know they traveled across the country. The money that was invested in them to do all this work, it has gone waste. Absolutely waste. No one is questioning, no one is talking about it. It's the poor taxpayers' money that was used to finance this work. It didn't get to its final destination. So the investment has gone waste. There are so many instances, and Ghana is gradually, if not gradually, it is speedily becoming a country of wastage. We take pleasure in wasting so much the public resources. But let me come back to this. And so I am one person who believes strongly that the 92 Constitution needs a stronger look at, particularly with the chapter that gives the powers to the executive and, for that matter, the president. For me, I believe that it is the power invested, or the power is invested in one person being the president, is too much, and we need to take a stronger look at it. If a president having such powers can come out and tell us that he was misled, then this is a serious issue, a serious matter. This is just the energy part of it. Which other departments or parts or ministries or decisions that the president has made since he took over as a president? Which other decisions was he or did he make? And what form of information did he get before he made those decisions? You remember we were talking of, and I'm sure, I think Suhini or Doc mentioned it earlier on, when we're talking of this U.S.-Ghana military deal. And we raised so many issues on it. The president decided to go ahead with it because, well, he has taken the decision, so he went ahead with it. Can we also say that the president was misled? Because any reasonable person who will go through that agreement will have a one conclusion, and that conclusion is that there's something wrong with the agreement. And yet the president decided that, no, let's go ahead with it. This is a president who has elected the highest form of ministers as far as the Fourth Republic is concerned. And look at what is happening with regards to security in this country. Look at what is happening with regards to education in this country. Look at what is happening with regards to health in this country. Today we are talking of energy, or talking about energy. Look at what is happening there. And the president tells us that today, he tells us that he was misled. Any serious economy, for the president to come out to even admit that he was misled, we should have a stronger cause to get so worried that we are not safe to have such a president deciding and dictating all the sectors that covers our life as individuals and as a nation. As I indicated, what happens? What are some of the decisions the president has taken with regards to security? Today, the police can just meet anyone on the streets and shoot and kill the person. Look at what happened in Kumasi. How many lives didn't we lose? Tomorrow, you wake up, and you are not even sure whether your work is secured or not. Because the president decides, or the government decides, that we should close this particular institution, let's shut down this particular bank, and let's shut down this organization. And we are not sure of what is happening. Today we talk of employment taking place, and then you are qualified and you decide to apply. And you are told that if you do not hold the membership card of NPP, you will not be allowed to be given an employment. And all these sectors are under a president who has told us clearly that most decisions that he's taken are decisions, or most decisions that he has taken are decisions he took based on a misinformed advices. But isn't it the president and the MPP government that's made all of us to believe that they have the experts and they have the people and they have the qualified individuals? What happened to due diligence? Or is it just because, well, it started from the former government, and so whilst in opposition we said so many things regarding some decisions that were made by the former president, and we created the impression that the former government was not leading this country very well. And so by all means, at all costs, let us find a way of discrediting some decisions that was taken by the former administration. Whether those decisions are right or wrong, let us find a way of discrediting it. Is that what is happening under this government? And if this is what is happening under this government, then we should be worried, because, as I mentioned earlier on, it is just because it is the taxpayers' money that are being used to do all these things that are ending nowhere, all these things that are taking us as a nation to no other ground. I will want to wish, Suini, I am not sure, but did you mention that the document has not been redrawn yet? Not yet. It has not been redrawn yet. I am just wishing and hoping that it will be officially redrawn. And if it is done, then we can really take it from there. That will also be another issue for discussion. But for now, I will plead with those in Parliament, particularly the opposition, to be extra vigilant, knowing very well that almost all decisions that passes through the president and will be submitted to them are decisions that were taken based on an ill-informed advice, yes, an ill-informed advice. And so they should be well vigilant. And that brings me to my very final one, which has to do with the parliament itself. I think, yes, the opposition in particular are doing well, but I think they can really do more than what they are doing. For the sake of protecting, the public purse, for the sake of protecting all of us as a nation, Parliament, and particular reference to the opposition, the minority, should be up and doing. There are so many decisions that passes through Parliament, and there are so many decisions that passes through Parliament, and it so happens that those of us outside, when we get the opportunity to look at the content in those decisions. It's so we keep worrying as to how these things could pass through Parliament, and as to how these things could pass. You remember the 2018 budgets, where the Ministry for Special Development Initiative came out with some strange figures and said that they want to take the taxpayers' money to go and drill a borehole, which I have repeated over and over and over, and said that a borehole, which all of us know, will cost not more than 50,000 Ghana cedi, not more than 50,000 Ghana cedi. This government says they want to take 132,000 Ghana cedi to go and drill one borehole. And they are not just drilling one borehole, they are drilling 100 boreholes. Is it 100 or 1,000 boreholes? I mean, we are all we all have our offices and we have our private websites and all that, and we know the cost of website development. And this government says that they need 800,000 Ghana cedi to develop a website. And unfortunately, this was passed. It passed through Parliament. Issues were raised, I know. By the end of the day, it was passed. I think that we should be sitting up, not just the minority in Parliament, but civil society should be awake. Individuals like you and I should be awake. Individuals in this country should be awake, because you see, the president has clearly indicated to us that he is not really on top of issues in this country. The president has indicated to us that he's not committed to protecting the public purse. The president has indicated to us that he himself, he doesn't really understand and he doesn't know exactly some of the decisions that he takes. The president, unfortunately, has told us that he's just like a dog, and no matter what we do, we cannot hang him. If he decides that this is what he's going to do, we will not be able to hang him because he's a dog. Well, that is true, but for purposes of we documenting, so that our next generation will know that we were alive, but we did something. Even if we could not change decisions, we were able to oppose decisions, and our names were written somewhere in the news archives that we were opposing certain decisions of the president, because it is clear the president is not in charge. For the sake of this, let us all be up and doing as a nation. Right. Because where this nation is moving to, for me, I am not very comfortable. Not at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, for your submission. That brings us to 23 minutes after 10. Mr. Pratt.
Well, first of all, I'd like to ask your permission to leave after this submission. And in so doing, I may possibly touch on the consolidation of 5 banks, comment briefly, and leave. The first thing I'd like to note in this discussion is that there are essential elements of this discussion that are being ignored. Since the rumor made the rounds that government is likely to withdraw the Emery bill, there have been so many other disclosures that are not being factored in the discussion. And I think it's important that we do that. One, because if we did that, we probably would find that the level of confusion is much more than is being exposed. Yesterday morning, I happened to have been on a panel for a radio discussion. Unfortunately, the General Secretary of the New Patriotic Party was on the panel. And when the issue was raised that the Emery deal was being withdrawn, he said no. And he asked for sources. When it was made clear to him that the disclosure was made by Mr. Gabi Asare-Ochiridakun and the statesman and others, he was emphatic that Gabi Ochiridakun, the statesman and others, do not speak for government. Now, this statement is significant to the extent that from what we know, he does participate in cabinet meetings. So who do we believe? The statesman, Gabi Ochiridakun, or the General Secretary of the party who has access to cabinet? Who do we believe? If we believe Gabi Asare-Ochiridakun and the statesman, the analysis would be different. If we believe the General Secretary, the analysis would also be different. I think it's important that we do the analysis properly. And I will do that before I leave. Now, this morning, I've read the Ghanaian Times, indeed page 9 of the Ghanaian Times. And the headline is, New Emery deal had no clearance from the Attorney General and Finance Minister. That's also a very important dimension of the discussion. Because all of such agreements need to be reviewed by the Chief Legal Advisor of the government, which happens to be the Attorney General. And indeed, earlier, we have been told that the Attorney General had reviewed the old agreement, the one that was signed under the Mahama administration, and had indicated that that agreement was okay. How come, if it is true, that this agreement did not go through the Attorney General? Of course, this agreement also has huge financial implications for the country. And we are being told that the Chief Finance Officer of government, the Finance Minister, did not clear the agreement. That is also a very interesting dimension. But you see, from what we have learned, this agreement received executive approval. Now, if you know the processes for obtaining executive approval, it is this: when cabinet is unable to fully discuss the matter, the president then on his own can give executive approval. So if this agreement was given executive approval, then it would suggest that cabinet itself did not look at it. And if cabinet did not look at it, who were the key people who drew the president's attention to the agreement and convinced him that the agreement was worthy of his signature? Obviously, no president would deal with such an agreement without the participation of the energy minister. So I think we can safely assume that the energy minister played a part in it, because the memorandum to cabinet or to the presidency must come from the energy ministry. That's the procedure. You understand? Now, the energy minister, what did he learn? What did he know? What convinced him that this new Ameri agreement was proper and fit for the signature of the president? That's another issue that we need to look at. But you see, first of all, let's take the scenario that government has agreed to withdraw the Ameri deal. Because it may well be that government has not decided to withdraw the deal.
Yeah.
And if government has not decided to withdraw the deal, and everybody is going on the tangent that government has decided to withdraw the deal, it will amount to demobilization. People will go to street believing that the deal has been withdrawn, when in actual fact it has not been withdrawn. And people will lower their vigilance levels. So if government has not decided to withdraw the bill, the deal, if government has not decided to withdraw the deal, then it means that government is going to push this deal through and defend it as something which is right, and so on. Now, for me, that would be exceedingly strange, given all the facts that we know, and given the position of the government itself, especially key members of the government when they were in opposition. I recall very clearly when the first Ameri deal was being discussed, that His Excellency Vice President Alhaji Mahmoud Bawumia made a very profound statement. He said the contract figure had been overblown by $150 million. The basis of his claim was that actually you can buy this plant for $200 million. And he actually gave us the place where you can go and buy it for $200 million. He told us that General Electric could sell it to us for $200 million. Why are they not buying from General Electric at $200 million as they indicated in opposition? Why is it that the bills now add up to something like $1.something billion, 5 times more than the price quoted by the Vice President? And how can anybody defend this if indeed the claim by the Vice President that you can buy the plant for $200 million was true? How can anybody defend this? Because if you're not going to withdraw it, then we're going to defend it and we're going to push it through. So how can anybody do that? Another aspect of the agreement which is worrying, over which many people have expressed disappointment, is simply the fact, apart from the fact that we're going to pay more, is the other fact that this agreement was meant to mature in 2.5 years, that in 2.5 years, the people of Ghana were going to own the plant 100%. The new agreement says that indeed the plant will be on lease for another 15 years. Why would anybody do that? A plant that we can own in 2.5 years, now we are going to own in 15 years. And it's not with reduced costs, it's with increased costs. It simply doesn't make sense. And I think we need to look at that quite seriously. Now, on the other hand, if government has truly decided that the deal is over, what does it mean? Does it mean that we are sticking to the old agreement? I would suppose so. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, given the noises which this administration has made about tampering with the agreement and so on, whether it is legal or not is another matter and so on. But this government's first option was to cancel the agreement. Is that option still on the cards? We don't know. If they are withdrawing this agreement and they are going to stick to the old agreement as advised by the Attorney General, what are the implications for the conduct of public officials? What should we say and not say? What should guide us when we are making public criticism and so on. That's also a very important, question. Now, there's nothing wrong with seeking vindication when you are proved right. Absolutely nothing wrong with seeking vindication. And I've heard a lot of that in the course of the week. So many of my friends have come and said, but we told you so, you were wrong, we are right, and so on. People are seeking vindication. It is right, there's nothing wrong with it, but I think it's important for us to look at the other side, to have a dialectical approach to this discussion. You see, all of us would want a situation in which citizens can force governments to take decisions, to change decisions, or to avoid some situations. All of us. Because every government is a human institution which is subject to fallibility. You understand? And that is why there are always checks and balances. People's power is the ultimate check on any state institution. So we should pray for a situation in which, when governments do make mistakes, and in some cases they may not be mistakes, in some cases they may be outright deliberate attempts to steal and so on. Those circumstances would also be there. But whatever it is, when people power is able to compel governments to change their minds or change decisions and so on, we should commend the people. And we should commend governments for bowing to the will of the people. Because there have been so many instances here and in the world in which governments have tended to be completely intransigent, leading to dire consequences for everybody. So we should create conditions which make it possible for governments to retreat with dignity, for state institutions to retreat with dignity. And I believe in that absolutely. I believe in that completely. Now, having said that, and you will see this point when it comes to the discussion of the consolidation of the 5 banks. There's a certain point which is absolutely important. If government decides to withdraw the deal, it would mean definitely that somebody or some people did not do their work well. What happens to those who did not do their work well? Who are those who are supposed to have carried out due diligence? And if indeed due diligence was not conducted or was not properly conducted, what happens to those whose duty was neglected? That's also a very important question which must be answered, in the equation. But my brothers, one journalist in this country that I have respected over the years is a gentleman called Cameron Dodu. And Cameron Dodu used to edit the Graphic at the time when the Busia Dankwa tradition was in power. And indeed, Dr. Busia was the Prime Minister of Ghana. At the time, in spite of world public opinion, and in spite of decisions that had been made by the Organization of African Unity to boycott the apartheid regime in South Africa, the Dankwa Busia tradition decided to do business with the apartheid regime. It proposed a policy of dialogue with apartheid. And Cameron Dodu, as editor of the Graphic, stood his ground and said it did not make sense to do business with apartheid. Indeed, argued that doing business with apartheid was tantamount to supporting apartheid. I'm not so sure, I cannot recollect properly, but I think eventually he lost his job or resigned. Cameron Dodu then became a big African hero and I've respected him since then. But this morning, he has written an article in the Daily Guide, and it is also published on page 9. Interestingly, this is also on page 9. And the heading is, "The Unmarried Deal Rears its Treacherous Head Again." Kamondodu argues very, very strongly that all of this brouhaha is because somebody who attended the cabinet meeting leaked the information and mobilized the media to condemn it.
Interesting.
I mean, I can't believe this. That this whole leakage came from the cabinet. And it was a cabinet minister who leaked the information and mobilized the media to wage a propaganda war against the deal. If you allow me, I'll read a few, there are 4 or 5 paragraphs of it. It will be very clear. He said, "Every cabinet is a coalition of persons holding different views, individuals of different character and upbringing, and of course, social background and stature. Well, it is therefore unrealistic to expect a cabinet to be absolutely consistent in all actions it takes, or to agree always on the line to be taken on specific issues. The important criteria for judging a cabinet then is not whether it is always united, but whether its members are endowed with the quality of being disciplined enough to accept a decision they had kicked against in cabinet, but on which they had not managed to carry their colleagues with them. Being disciplined means to accept the collective view without rancor. If the collective view happens to run counter to the conscience of a member of cabinet, the honorable and dignified thing to do is to offer his or her resignation to the head of cabinet, in our case, president, and in other cases, such as in Britain, to the prime minister. That's what recently happened in the case of Boris Johnson, the British Foreign Secretary. He disagreed irreconcilably with the Brexit policy of the prime minister. If on losing an argument, a member of cabinet stays within the government, but goes out clandestinely to attempt to defeat the collective view, listen very carefully, through an underground media campaign or by lobbying centers of power within the ruling party, then he has rebelled and he must be kicked out. He must be kicked out. And he writes, "No one who is not a member of our current cabinet can tell us exactly what happened with the new Ameri Energy Provision Agreement before it was rushed to Parliament for adoption. But it was extremely unusual that such a controversial agreement should have been placed before Parliament at a very short notice, just as it was about to rise. The impression given to MPs was apparently that the agreement was coming from the president, with the result that discussion of it was curtailed," and so on. And it goes on and on and on. I mean, you can see the drift. Now, something is incredible. This agreement went to Parliament after it had obtained executive approval. The only person who gives this executive approval is the president. And yet, our senior journalist is struggling to distance the president from the agreement. Seriously struggling to distance the president from the agreement. That it was done on his blind side. And so, how could it have been done on his blind side when it went to Parliament after executive approval? I cannot understand it. But you see, there's something else in this article which completely baffles me. Mr. Kamondodu gives the credit for this revelation to leading members of the New Patriotic Party and the statesman who must be commended for fighting against the new Ameri deal. Leading members of the New Patriotic Party and the statesman are those who, according to Mr. Cameron Dodu, deserve credit for, first of all, revealing the deal and fighting against the deal. You know, I mean, this is an important lesson in news management and in propaganda. Because if this kind of thinking becomes predominant, everything changes, everything is skewed and so on. And it's a very interesting article, and I suppose that people will read it on their own and come to their conclusions. But you see, this discussion also throws up a number of other interesting things. Here we are, and this is not the first time, we are being told to ignore things that are published in the Statesman, and that they do not reflect party position and they do not reflect government position. Here we are being told to ignore things said and written by Gabi Asari Ochridaku, that they do not reflect government position and they do not reflect party position. Very interesting. Extremely interesting. But you see, the same people who argue that what Gabi Ochridaku says does not reflect government position, what the Statesman says does not reflect government position and so on, will turn around and say that what is published in the Palava is the true NDC position. You know, when, whose name can I use? When, give me a name. I mean, when Koku Anyido, for example, says something, it is the true reflection of the thinking of President Mahama and the true reflection of the thinking of the National Democratic Congress. But when Gabi Ochridaku says something and writes something and so on, it is not the true reflection of President Akufo-Addo and of the New Patriotic Party. I think we have to learn to apply the same standards across board. What is good for the NDC must be good for the NPP. And what is bad for the NPP must be good for the NDC and all other political parties. The standards ought to be the same. You know, if we are to look at the problems that confront our country in a very dispassionate, honest manner, then we need to have standards which we shall then use, you know, to guide us and so on. Now, I've also heard some people, and perhaps it is legitimate and right, and so on, say that the president must bear full responsibility for what has happened. Of course, the buck stops with the president. Every minister acts in his name. You understand? This is a presidential system of government, and therefore the president cannot escape blame. However, let us be practical. And for those of you who have been in government, I've never been in government before. So he hasn't been in government, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody here who has been in government. But I've been in the public service for some time. And I've seen memorandums to government on small matters. Sammy, I am not deceiving you. Check. Memorandum with the appendices and so on, sometimes they can be up to 900 pages. 900 pages. So imagine that within a week, and now we have 110 ministries. 10% of the ministries decide to submit documents to the presidency for approval of that nature. You are talking about 9,000 pages. Let's be realistic. Look at the amount of work that the president has to do, and the other things that he has to do and so on. It is not possible to have any president anywhere in the world who reads every document line by line, word by word, and so on. It is not possible. It doesn't happen. You understand? So, it may be an issue. Of course, don't run away from the fact that every president is responsible for the actions of his ministers. He appoints them. He keeps them there. And they act in his name. So when they make mistakes, it reflects on him. But the real practical day-to-day work of the president shows that on a number of occasions, he has to rely on his confidence in people.
Competent ones.
People that he himself has appointed. He cannot come and tell us that he appointed incompetent people. Because if he appoints incompetent people, he's incompetent himself, and so on. But the point I'm making is that it is possible for presidents to be misled. That's a fact. But when presidents are misled too many times, then there's a problem. If the president is misled today, misled tomorrow, misled yesterday, and so on, it does create the impression. It does create the impression that there's something wrong with the president himself. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Now, when presidents are genuinely misled, it is reasonable to expect that those who do the misleading will suffer some consequences for misleading the president. Look, under our criminal law, deceit of public officer is a crime. If you go to the police and tell them that, if I go to the police and tell them that Suhini slapped me, Keke, and it turns out that Suhini did not slap me, he was not even in the jurisdiction and so on, I've committed a criminal offense for which I can be convicted by a court. So what about somebody who lies to the president? Misleading is lying.
Deceiving a public officer.
You understand? And the president is a public officer anyway. Yeah. And he lies to the president to the extent that he commits the nation to an expenditure in excess of $1 billion. What happens to the person? So I insist that every president, being human and being head of human institutions and so on, can be misled. But when they have been misled, there must be consequences. When those consequences do not occur, then there's another problem, and so on. So I think it's important for us to recognize, this. My view is that this new and merry deal cannot be justified under any circumstances. If you look at it in terms of value for money, it cannot be justified under any circumstances. It is my view that it would worsen the burden that has already been imposed on our people, the financial burden that has already been imposed on our people by way of high tariffs for electricity supply and so on. And therefore, this deal should be thrown out of the window. This is a bad deal and must be thrown out of the window. Now, Sami, if you allow me, I'll make very brief comments about the consolidated bank and matters leading to that. I've read the Bank of Ghana release, and in all honesty, I'm totally shocked at some of the practices in the banks. For example, it is alleged that in some of the banks, the directors, shareholders, and so on, raided the banks. They raided the vaults of the banks and just took money with both hands, left, right, center, and all. You understand? This is a bad practice. Corporate governance in some of the banks was horrible. Horrible. We are also told that some of the banks actually obtained their licenses with fraudulent means.
False pretense.
And under false pretenses and so on. You cannot allow that to happen in any civilized society and so on. Indeed, in some of the banks, customers' deposits were under risk, serious risk. So the regulator has to step in. But see, these do not apply to all the banks. some of the banks did not obtain their licenses under false pretense. In some of the banks, the directors and shareholders did not raid the banks, the vaults of the banks, and so on. You understand? So I think we should be careful not to paint all the banks with the same brush as the old cliche goes. We need to look at all the banks on a case-to-case basis. I want to look at Unibank, for example. Now, anybody who has read the KPMG report on Unibank would recognize one thing very significant. The report says that if the indebtedness of government to the bank was cleared, the bank's insolvency problems will be solved. You understand? So it is clear that one of the difficulties confronting that bank is the fact that government owes it heavily and is not paying. And even with the other banks, it is also clear that loans they had granted to persons who had done government contracts and who were not being paid and so on had become a major problem for them and so on. So we need to take that into consideration. Then also, I happen to have tried to understand banking in Nigeria. Now, if you look at the banking regulations in Nigeria, you will find that there's a deliberate effort to discriminate in favor of local banks and against foreign banks. Whereas in Ghana, there is no such discrimination. For example, when the Bank of Ghana decided to raise the capital adequacy ratio to 400 million, the same thing applied to local banks and foreign banks. There was no discrimination. In Nigeria, it is not so. So I want to find out, and this government talks a lot about protecting local interests as against foreign interests. How local interest in banking is being protected against foreign interest in banking when there's no positive discrimination in favor of local banks. That's one of the problems that I have. Again, if you look at the Bank of Ghana statement and you admit, like I do, that there were problems with the banks and so on, you ask yourself, when did these problems start? And why did the Bank of Ghana sit there with his hands in his laps, snoring for all these years? Why? If people obtained banking licenses under false pretenses and so on, they are as guilty as those who did not do due diligence and allowed the fraud to be perpetrated. Because the Bank of Ghana has a responsibility as a regulator to ensure that people do not obtain banking licenses under false pretenses. I hope you do understand what I'm saying very clearly. So yes, the directors of the bank may have done something wrong and so on. The Bank of Ghana cannot be fully exonerated. And what I'm hearing about sending them to court and prosecuting them and investigating them and so on, it must necessarily also apply, to the Bank of Ghana itself. Now, again, and I hate to do this, but I have no option. Increasingly, Dr. Bawumia Alhaji, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, His Excellency the Vice President, is getting into a lot more difficulty. As the days rolls on and so on, he's always getting into difficulty. And he's getting into difficulty because of the statements he made in opposition. Because I recall him warning all of us, and of course that was after we had published the story about 2 years earlier about the possibility of banks going to collapse and so on, for which we were taken to court. He came much later, 2 years later, and repeated the same thing. And for that, they say he's a guru. We haven't even learned economics. We've never worked in Bank of Ghana. We're able to predict that 2 years before him. You understand? But be that as it may, he came and said, look, 8 banks were likely to go under. And that if they were elected, given power, they could take prudent measures to save the banks and save the financial sector. Have the banks been saved? Have the banks been saved? I wonder. The other thing that strikes me is simply this. Banking can be reduced to the management of risk. Banking, you can reduce banking to the management of risk. You collect deposits and you invest the deposits and so on with your eyes wide open, your ears wide open, and your thinking capacity tickling. You understand what I'm saying? So, if you establish a bank and you mismanage it and it collapses and so on, why should the ordinary taxpayer sitting somewhere in a village, why should the Kayayo or whoever is paying tax be compelled to come and bail you out? Why? Then we are told that it's because the public is interested in what is happening. Poor people have deposited their monies in the banks and so on. But the poor people who are going to deposit their money in failing banks, didn't they see the other banks which are thriving? They make choices. There are so many banks. You choose one. If your choice doesn't work, why should I suffer? I didn't choose your bank. You chose your own bank. Why should I suffer? You remember in the Muhammad era, the case in the Bohafo region involving God is love and Kobinili and Kobinili. If you look at those who did the deposits, they included lawyers. They included bankers. They included priests. They included police people and so on, teachers and all. You hear of a financial institution called God is Love, which promises you impossible returns. And then you go and withdraw your life savings and go and put it in. When your money gets lost, the government come and pay. Use the truck driver's tax to go and pay. Doesn't make sense. So I don't understand why we are doing. Then it's okay. Everybody will set up some business. When it collapses, because poor people's money are inside, you go and take the money from government. Is this what capitalism is about? Is this what competition on the market is about? And so on. If this is what competition on the market is about, then it amounts to nothing but robbing the poor in order to keep the rich forever. So I think we need to rethink this whole thing about taking government money and putting it in wasteful enterprises and so on. Look, I'm very familiar with the First Capital Bank. That is the bank whose documents we saw first and realized that it was going to go under. And indeed, if you look at the documents of that bank that we had, the revelations in it are no different from what the Bank of Ghana is saying about all the other banks and so on. I mean, the directors raided the bank. They took loans that they were not going to pay. They took monies which were written off the books and so on. You understand? But in the case of First Capital Bank, there was something which was highly commendable. The then managing director of the bank was Mr. Kofi Mensah, who is now managing director of the Agricultural Development Bank. He saw the trends and he wrote a memo to the directors warning them that if they did not take remedial action, the bank will collapse and all of them will end up being in prison and so on. And we published those documents and so on. You understand? So at least there was somebody in the bank who was diligent enough to warn of the consequences of what was happening and so on. But it's clear that regular inspections of the banks and so on can reveal all of these things, all of these trends and so on. Why was it not done? And First Capital continued to operate under this facade for years. Even now, as we speak, what has the Bank of Ghana done in the case of UT Bank and First Capital Bank in order to establish culpability? And then there's something even worse. If you study the allegations that the Bank of Ghana is making against the 5 banks that have recently been merged into Consolidated Bank and so on, you'll find something interesting. Some of these 5 banks their condition is much worse than the condition of UT and Capital. So why didn't the Bank of Ghana collapse them before collapsing UT and Capital? And I can go into the details if you want. So there are so many unanswered questions. Because I'm in a hurry, let me just simply say this and walk out. You see, if the indigenous banks are swallowed by foreign banks or collapse and so on, it will have serious consequences for the national economy. Serious consequences for the national economy. And the whole talk of indigenizing the economy will be empty talk. So we have to find ways of ensuring prudent management of local financial institutions or all local institutions and so on. And take steps to positively discriminate in favor of our own as against others. Master, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt, for your submission. That brings us to 5 minutes after 11. I will take the time to go through your text messages at the tail end of the show. Let me pick the comment of Alhaji Suhini. On this matter, I'll come to Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, and then I'll end with Dr. Deodat Adenuchi and read all the comments that I've gotten this morning. Alhaji.
All right. Thank you very much once again. Now, I want to start on a, if you like, a political note. And it has to do with the dishonesty in our politics that sometimes is helped by our media, or sections of our media, either consciously or unconsciously. So, for example, I'll refer you to a headline that I saw, and it had to do with what at the time was said to be a prophetic statement by the running mate of Nana Akufo-Addo, president now, Dr. Bawumia, who is also vice president. It was in October 2016. 8 banks collapsing under Mahama. 8 banks collapsing under Mahama. I don't know if you have seen any headline so far that says 8 banks collapses under Akufo-Addo. Now, in that presentation, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia at the time outlined the difficulties the banks were facing and also recommended solutions. None of the recommended solutions have been implemented as we speak. None. He said the banks were under stress, especially because of government indebtedness and government borrowing. And that to save the banks, government needed to make good its indebtedness to these banks. Those were among some of the suggested solutions. None included what has been implemented. Yet, you don't have 8 banks, or so far we have 7. 7 banks collapses under Nana Addo, because in 18 months, we have had 7 banks collapsing under Nana Akufo-Addo. With all the solutions that Dr. Bawumia had at the time, he hasn't been able to save those banks. Why? Was it a case of call a dog a bad name and hang it?
this dog now we have says he can't be hung after he has hanged a lot of innocent dogs? Because I don't get it. And you see, this is what tells you, Sammy, that the experts who are saying that the actions taken by Bank of Ghana are necessary wouldn't have been saying so if President Mahama took those actions, if the NDC took those actions. Because they allowed Bawumia to get away with a headline like the one I have just read to you. They wouldn't have tolerated President Mahama collapsing those banks because it would have been used as politics. It would have been used as a political whip against him. If he took the same actions now that they are commending and saying are actions that should be taken. Why do we do that? Some people have the birthright to govern and to take some decisions. For example, Sammy, we just witnessed the president swearing in the new electoral commissioner. In the appointment of Jane Mensah is missing in the appointment of Charlotte Osei. Tell me, which element is missing? How many people did the president consult? Which institutions did he consult? So, were people requiring President Mahama to do some kind of consultations because he was not befitting to be president? Why are they not making the same request of Nana Akufo-Addo? Because it is his birthright to govern and to rule with the constitution, and so when he does it, no one says anything.
When the president said he was going to consult.
That is the case. If it is about a woman, she's also a woman. Charlotte Osei was a woman. Yeah. She's beautiful. The president says Charlotte Osei was beautiful. She's married. Charlotte Osei was married. She's a lawyer. Charlotte Osei was a lawyer. Or is a lawyer. She's appointed by a president. Madam Charlotte Osei was appointed by a president, working with the constitution. So tell me which element is missing. So why did we have that heat? I mean, some people suggested Madam Charlotte Osei was beautiful, and so some kind of, things I don't want to repeat here may have been the consideration used for her appointment. Why are we not hearing the same thing? Because she's also beautiful and she's also married. If people could be that reckless to even think that of married women, why are we not hearing that? So that is what convinces me that if President Mahama had taken the decisions Dr. Bawumia and the president are supervising now under the Bank of Ghana, he wouldn't have been encouraged and told he is taking the right steps, because the headlines already started emerging that he was collapsing the banks. Now they have collapsed them. So some people are more befitting. Well, maybe I should take consolation in the fact that Mr. Osafo Mafu said it, that if you do not have resources, if you don't come from resource regions in this country, you have no business being at the top and acting as a president, supervising and superintending over the resources of this nation. So maybe it is that mindset that makes it intolerable when certain people are there and take the decisions that requires of them as presidents. But that aside, let me go to the Constitution, Sammy. I want us to look at Article 36(1)(b). Article 36(1)(b). It says, the state shall in particular take all necessary steps to establish a sound and healthy economy whose underlying principles shall include B, affording ample opportunity for individual initiative and creativity in economic activities, and fostering an enabling environment for a pronounced role of the private sector in the economy. Affording ample opportunity for individual initiative and creativity in economic activities, and fostering an enabling environment for a pronounced role of the private sector in the economy. I want us to take note of that. I'll come to explain why I think it is necessary as we look at what is happening in the banking sector. Then we'll look at 108, Article 108. II. Parliament shall not, unless the bill is introduced or the motion is introduced by or on behalf of the President, the imposition of a charge on the consolidated fund or other public funds of Ghana, or the alteration of any such charge otherwise done by reduction. That is the relevant portion. The fact that you cannot put any charge on the consolidated fund unless it is through a bill presented by the President to Parliament. Now take note of that also. And finally, we'll look at 192. Then I'll do the analysis. Article 192 says a public corporation shall not be established except by Act of Parliament. A public corporation shall not be established except by Act of Parliament. Now, Sami, we know as we speak, or I want to find out, if Consolidated Bank is a public corporation, is it going to operate as a public corporation? Because that's what we are told. It's going to be set up using taxpayers' money. So where is the Act of Parliament setting it up? I want to be educated. Is the establishment within the Constitution, the establishment of Consolidated Bank? I want to know, under Article 192, whether Consolidated Bank will operate as a public corporation. And if so, whether it is not incorrect to set it up in the manner that it has been set up without parliamentary approval. Then it becomes pronounced, that issue becomes pronounced because of Article 108 II, which says that you cannot put a charge on the public or consolidated fund unless it is through a bill presented by Parliament. Presented by the President to Parliament. Now, definitely we are told that some billions of money from the Consolidated Fund is being used to undertake the establishment of a bank that will, implement the liquidation of these other 5 banks. Is it lawful? I'm not a lawyer, so I just read the black and white. But reading it makes me raise some of these questions that are begging for answers. Is that lawful? Then 36(1)(b) talks about the need for the government to create the enabling environment and to encourage individual creativity in the financial sector. Now, is that what we are seeing? Is that what we are seeing? Some people have even suggested that the Bank of Ghana approach is draconian. Is that what the Constitution requires of the government of the day? Even if people faulted, even if people mismanaged, is the solution what is being recommended, knowing the repercussions on the economy? Is that the only solution? Knowing the repercussion on the economy and on livelihoods in general? Because we know that the impact of what is happening is going to be dire.
first of all, we are going to experience a decline in funds for investment. And when you have that decline, you will have a situation where less people will be willing or simply unable. Banks. Less banks will be willing or simply unable to lend money to firms and companies. Even existing ones will become wary. And so it's going to lead to a situation where people with the ingenuity to even start business will find it more difficult now to find money to make investments. Especially businesses that are risky. Already we have a concern that many of our banks are risk averse. And most of the risky projects in this country are incidentally semi-government projects. And many banks shy away from government projects. Why? Because it takes a longer time for governments to pay. And so when you look at the NPLs of most of the banks, a chunk of it can be attributed to loans that were advanced to people to do government jobs or government businesses. So you have a situation where government projects will also suffer as we speak, because the existing banks today will take a cue from what has happened to the unibanks. And when you take a government contract to them for financing, they will not be enthused to invest in that project. We already know that the e-blogs, the roads that were started, the hospitals that were finished are all not being utilized, and the contractors not paid, even for work done, because of some of these things. And most of these contractors took the loans from their banks. And most of the contractors, when you speak to them, took the loans from the banks that are being affected. So the decline in funds for investment is something we can't avoid. And that will have a toll on the general economic performance as well. Because if businesses don't invest, they will not expand, and there will not be the need to employ people. And that is what leads me to the next issue of unemployment. What is happening just within the banking sector alone? We already know that many people are going to lose their jobs in that sector. The rippling effect is that the decline in investments or available funds to invest will also impact negatively on already existing businesses that depended on these banks. And eventually, those companies will also have to lay off because they will reduce production. So the already bad unemployment situation that they promised to resolve has just been made worse. It has just been made worse. Then you have the issue of confidence in the banking sector. Already we have a chunk of our population that is unbanked. Sometimes because of lack of confidence in the sector. What is happening has led to, the obvious threat to depositor savings. And it will become enticing to people to now keep their money in other instruments or under their beds rather than keep it in the bank. And clearly, people will prefer now to save in cash, to have cash savings. And the banking sector is going to be the loser at the end of the day. I've already talked about the unemployment situation, because when the savings are not there, there won't be loanable funds, and so businesses will not have the funds to expand and require more hands and all of that. So clearly, I think that the approach that is being used cannot be the best approach, nobody is denying the fact that there has been a problem, and that problem needed to be resolved. But the politics that we have played with it and the draconian way that we are dealing with it now, I do not think in the long run will serve the nation well.
Right.
And people have talked about the fact that, well, Nigeria also did that, and that is how come the Nigerian banks... Look, let us be a bit sincere and try to read about some of these things. What was the Nigerian situation, and how did they deal with it? Did they do it as we are doing? No. In fact, the CMB, according to reports, after their assessment, just like we have also assessed our banks, I think we did that in 2015 and realized these problems, came to the conclusion that about 7 steps needed to be taken to address the situation of bad corporate governance and, all the ills that we also found in our banking sector when the assessment was done in 2015. 7 steps were outlined. Guess what? The 6th step was what we are implementing. The 6th step, not the 1st step, not the 2nd, not the 3rd, not the 4th, the 6th one that the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, outlined is what we have gone for. So is it to say that we have already tried all the other 5? Because the bridge banking that is being done now was not the first option for Nigeria. For example, they recommended changing management of the banks. The Central Bank of Nigeria recommended changing management of the banks. They tried that for some banks. They injected funds into the ailing banks. They provided guarantee to cover their exposures. They established an asset management company to take over the NPLs. That's the non-performing loans. Before they considered adopting the bridge banking so that they could manage the liquidation process. So the first step was not bridge banking, was not, consolidating all the banks and taking over and collapsing everything. That wasn't the first approach used in Nigeria. So why are we using that approach? Now we are told that this arrangement will last for 2 years. And after 2 years, it will be divested. And shares will be sold. It is based on this rather harsh approach that some people legitimately are raising the question of whether this is not an attempt to create some empires for some people. To take over and create empires for some people. Because eventually we are told that it will be divested and people will buy shares. I mean, who are those people?
When we get there.
And you also have the very... I don't know, some people... It's so unacceptable that sometimes you struggle to find the correct adjective to describe it. Construction Bank, I'm told, for example, the license was given by the governor. In fact, the inauguration was graced by the governor. And then he turns around to say that, or to suggest that the establishment was done based on false pretenses. So who should we be clapping hands for? And who should we be holding responsible? So I think that, yes, we know, in fact, we have known since 2015, based on the assessment, that something needed to be done with our banking sector. What needed to be done, I don't believe is what is being done. Because
For example, I have already quoted Article 36(1)(b) says that we must support individual efforts. So if people have come together to set up some of these banks that have led to, creation of employment for many families, and also have led to, businesses accessing funds to expand, if they find themselves in trouble, like we found out in 2015, there's a need to use solutions such as those that were suggested by the Central Bank of Nigeria to rectify what may have gone wrong, and perhaps use the bridge way of resolving the crisis as a last resort.
Honorable, I am grateful for
Thank you.
Your comments this morning. We have 30 minutes. I would give 10 minutes to Dr. Dudat. I would give 10 minutes to Mr. Emmanuel Wilson for their comments on this subject. Mr. Wilson.
Well, very brief. I may not even exhaust the 10 minutes on it, okay? Now, let me start by getting to where Suhini started from, where he was making reference to a headline story which indicates under the past administration that 8 banks have collapsed. Now, Suhini, you shouldn't be surprised that today we are not getting such headlines. You remember, Sami, I was here last week, and then I indicated that one of my worries, the fact that as opposition political parties, we don't have a strong mouthpiece when we get into the media fraternity. We don't have it. Now, the question that comes into my mind is, where is the Ghanaian lens? Where is Raymond Archer's Enquirer? Where is the crystal clear lens? Where is even in this house, where is the Muntie FM? Ironically, all these stations collapsed under an NDC regime. And so today we sit here, and the party in government...
Muntie did not collapse under an NDC regime.
Muntie faded off before we came into 2016.
It was after 2017.
It was just after, okay, that's fine, after 2017. But most of these media houses that I've mentioned ceased from operating just after the 2016 elections. Okay, and so it is worrying that we are not creating a platform where we will strengthen our own mouthpiece. And just like someone said, anyone who wants to report or want to write a history, that person is not necessarily writing what truly transpired, but that person is writing from his or her personal perspective. And so if we don't get individuals to communicate our own stories, and we expect that others will communicate our stories for us, this will be the result that will happen. Some individuals have expressed shock when the the Bank of Ghana Governor, Dr. Ernest Addison, in his press statement release indicated that some banks are going off because of some few reasons. I knew this was going to happen, and trust me, between now and 2020, when the MPP government will come to an end, we are going to have some few other banks also going off. And so it is not surprising. Anyone who expresses surprise and doubt, it is clear that that person is not really following the agenda of Nana Ado's government. That's His Excellency Nana Ado. I am told from the communication that came from the Bank of Ghana that Unibank and Royal Bank were undercapitalized, and that those banks were beyond rehabilitation, and that's the reason why they've been taken off. I am told, or we are told, by the Bank of Ghana that Royal Bank had a non-performing loans which were very high, and that is why they've been taken off. We are also told by the Bank of Ghana that the sovereign bank obtained its license by false pretenses through the use of suspicious and non-existent capital. Now, if we are looking at the Unibank and the Royal Bank, I know of contractors who went into this, particularly with regards to Unibank, went to take loans to execute projects that were awarded them or to them by the government, either by the immediate past government, or largely by the immediate past government that I know. And unfortunately, till date, they've not been paid. If you are owing someone and you've not paid the person, how do you expect the person to get money to go and pay the loan that he or she went for? And so I was expecting that this government would have looked thoroughly at, addressing some of these issues before thinking of collapsing these banks. The other one, which is very worrying, is Sovereign Bank. I was trying to get exactly or identify exactly which period did Sovereign Bank obtained its license, but I'm yet to be told the exact year. But whichever year it was, if Sovereign Bank could obtain license by false pretense, when the license was being given to them, those authorities in charge of issuing the license, what work did they do before issuing those licenses? It is just like me coming to you and pretending to be something or someone that I'm not, to engage you in a particular agreement, and then you agree to it. Normally, under normal circumstance, we all expect that before you go into any form of agreement, you would have done some possible background checks. What structures do those institutions have to cross-check the requirements that will be submitted to them before they issue licenses? How many banks do we have in this country that we are yet to see and are operating with a license, but they did acquire the license under false pretense? How many banks are we yet to see? It is very worrying that if we are paying individuals and institutions to ensure that we have the adequate and the appropriate work being done, and some of these institutions fails to do their work, and as a result, will issue licenses that are not supposed to be issued licenses to individuals that are not supposed to have those licenses. And then we turn around at the end of the day and we say that, well, this company is working under a license that was acquired under false pretense. And because of that, we are collapsing that bank. And then you turn around again and then you say, because we are collapsing that bank, we are going to inject some money coming from the taxpayer. When a taxpayer, the KIU, gives his or her tax, the KIU, so gives her tax, she's expecting that money will be used to build road, construct road, to build infrastructure where she and her child will have quality health, will build infrastructure where her child will have quality education, will put up the right mechanism such that she or he will be able to get access to quality water. These are the things that the ordinary taxpayer is looking out for, and not the taxpayer expecting that her money will be used to take care of banks simply because some individuals decided or refused or failed to do what they are being paid to do. I don't think this is fair and this is right. The Bank of Ghana governor indicated that there will not be any job lost. And this is an absolute lie. And I'm wondering why the Bank of Ghana governor will make this pronouncement, particularly when they are saying that all these 4 banks are going to be under one particular bank. You and I know that you move to certain vicinities and then you have about 2 of these banks having their branches in the same premise. You go to a particular place where they have a story building and you can see Unibank here, you can see Royal Bank there. Proximity sake, there's no way Consolidated Bank, the new bank that has been formed, will have 1 branch or 2 branches in the same compound. It doesn't make operational sense. So obviously there's going to be some loss in terms of employment. Individuals are going to lose their work. You know UT Bank, when it collapsed, if you have friends in there, you will know that some friends did lose their job. Not to talk of this. There are a lot of people who are going to lose their job, and it is going to compound to the unemployment situation we have in this country. And it has become very clear that this government doesn't have what it takes to even handle the unemployment situation. It is very clear. They don't know. They don't have what it takes. Indeed, what this government has decided to do is what we call elimination by substitution. And so if they perceive you to belong to a particular political party and you are working in a particular organization, they find a way of frustrating you and taking you off. And then they bring in their members to fill in the gap. So they give employment to a new person and they create unemployment by sacking the old person. And that is exactly what is happening now. I just pray and wish. I just pray and wish, as I keep saying, that 2020 will come very soon so that we'll be able to move out of this burden that all of us find ourselves in. But isn't it ironical that this government, particularly under Bawumia, most of the platforms they get will indicate that this economy is doing very well, extremely well. The question I ask myself is, how can banks collapse in an economy that is doing very well?
Thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, for your comments. I will read a few comments that I've received this morning before I come to Dr. Deodat Adenuchi for his comments on the show this morning with respect to our last issue for today. And I'll start with that of Dennis Yakote. Dennis sends the message, Sami, Ghana is indeed moving forward, but certainly in the wrong direction. Very soon we shall come to learn that perhaps the president was also misled to remove the EC boss from office. Son of Justice, depart not from us until everything is made new. Shalom. That's from Dennis Yakote, sending that through Hadi. From Pig Farm sent the message, Ghanaians really went to bed with an itching anus and woke up with smelly fingers. Our economy is in bizarre state, and yet the NPP are still defending the dying economy without putting pragmatic measures to shape it. Our cedi is depreciating against all the currencies. Stealing is getting worse under the NPP. Government is lying almost about everything, yet instead of the NPP calling their government to be accountable and sit up, they are rather defending it. Allah save Mother Ghana. Hadi from Pig Farm sent that Professor Kwame Aristocrat sent the message saying, we have a problem with the death prophecies of our pastors, which bother security when they wait for it to happen. But we hail an economic prophet, Dr. Bawumia, when he said that banks will collapse, and they are collapsing under his watch. The irony of it is that he opened the construction bank. Not less than 8 months, it has collapsed. And this says Pastor Ostabel is his advisor, whilst his cousin Ofurata is an elder in ICGC. So he couldn't, let me get the message, he couldn't jail him when he collapsed Capital Bank. And I ask, will Nadu jail Professor Day as a board chairman of the Beige Cap Bank, who advises his cousin at the finance ministry? What a misleading dog. Press Krese Kwame Aristocrat sent that one from Old Barrier. Let me move on to Twitter and read a few tweets that I have also gotten through. This one from lawyer Chris Akume. He says the collapsed banks are now put together as Ghana Consolidated Bank. It has same acronym as GCB. Sami, the logo of the original GCB is a bird, an eagle to be precise. What will be the logo of GCB 2? I will suggest GCB2 to adopt a barking dog at its logo. The advantage is to prevent GCB2 from being hanged by the Bank of Ghana in future. That's from lawyer Chris Akume. But I think it's Consolidated Bank Ghana. Yes, so it's CBG, not GCB. So thank you very much for that text message. Let me go to Twitter, or let me go to Facebook first. But before that, let me read one from Dr. David Percy. Dr. Percy says, Same, in electing President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, Ghanaians put the wolf, the fox, the hawk, the hyena. Please take the one you want. In direct charge of our hen coop, no one misled the president on a merry, which is why no one will be punished. That's from Dr. David Percy, sending that through this morning. Charles Nyame from Asaman Kese says, the whole president can also be misled this way, then we are doomed as a nation, especially when those who misled him are still in office. Seriously, some arrests and prosecutions must be made on this renegotiated American deal before their shameful U-turn would be accepted. Regards to Chairman Teria Boateng, Oliver Kevo, and Shirley Nana Osei Ampem, or in the eastern region. Musa Abatua from Kumasi says, NPP are taking Ghanaians for a ride after clustered NDC administration has engaged in corrupt practices by Mary and ransacked the home of former power minister and his deputy John Jinapo. Today we are being told the extended deal to 15 years when actual fact is supposed to end in 2020. Where are the likes of Bright, Simon, and Co., who strongly criticize that deal? This one from Ishak Amadou says, good morning, Mr. Shen, and to your panelists. I think this morning you've done a fantastic job by bringing all these men to throw more light on the issues. Let me say a very good morning to the Honorable Aban Babin. He's the right man to lead the NDC. Thank you for that comment. I will go ahead and read some tweets as well on Twitter before I come over to Dr. Deodat Adenuchi. This one from Unpaid Hungry Teacher, that's the Twitter handle. He says, did you hear the NDC contractors' money will rot? Collapse of the banks is that step. This one from Hack BS says, Ghana and President Akufo-Addo is fast deteriorating. In 2016, DataBank was fished out by economic indicators as a collapsing bank, only for the NPP to assume office, and DataBank is one of the performing banks. There's some political interference at the central bank. A boon tweets and says, Sammy, good morning, and thank you for the issues you are discussing this morning. President Akufo-Addo is the man leading Ghana astray, and Ghana will grind to a halt one of these days. We should change him before 2020, but in doing so, we should be thinking about the Honorable Aban Babin. This one from Habib in Sawom says, President Akufo-Addo government is the most corrupt government Ghana ever had. Today, if okay, let me get a message here. Today, if it's not, I'm not aware. Tomorrow, it will be I have been misled. What the government Akufo-Addo is handling. This one says, greetings to all in the studio. Please, if our president can be misled to sign a deal, then we are not safe as a country. This one says, okay. John Terry Trash says, Nado's presidential installation phrases, he wasn't aware, he didn't know, he was misled, yet he's in charge. Truth is that all of them are the top are aware. Ghanaians deserve better. And let me move down and see. This one from Divine Jory Manche says, okay. You say that I should try to learn from a humble lawyer who hosts a news file on Joy FM. And I think it's in connection with an earlier tweet you had done which you suggested that I was being biased when I was reading the headlines of the newspapers this morning. And your take was that you listen to me all the time, and this is the tweet: I listen to you all the time. Your JM will not make it, so please change your style. Your ambition to be a politician will not help if you go on supporting John Dramani Mahama, blah, 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 blah. And you went on. Chief, thank you for the advice. I'll take a cue from all that you've shared with me this morning. So those are a few of the tweets that I can share with you before the show comes to an end. I have seen some others that have come through, but let me pick Dr. Deodat's comments, and then if I do have the time, I will read those comments. Doc, your final words.
Yeah, Sammy, thank you very much once again. This collapse of banks have not come to me at any surprise at all. You recall when the first two, the Unibank and Capital Bank, were liquidated or were taken over rather radically just at the onset of assumption of duty from with the new government. And we were here, and you said you didn't see it coming. I told you that there were a lot of other banks with similar characteristics as far as not meeting some of the regulatory conditions and procedures were concerned. But then, having said that, we have to understand the whole scenario as far as bank operations, their failures are concerned. So I rather want to probably spend this time to educate all of us, or to remind us as far as these issues are concerned. When we say a bank has failed, what actually do we mean? It just means that altogether, the bank has consistently reported its performance statement to indicate that it has more liabilities than its assets. And you look at both the magnitude and the trend for you to come to a conclusion one day to say that this bank has failed. So generally, when a bank fails, it means that it is either at the point of being liquidated or being merged with a more healthy financial institution or a bank or a takeover. And normally this thing comes from a pressure that comes from the supervisor, that is the regulator, the central bank, in our case. Now, I know the Honorable MP was saying that we have to go through a lot of procedures. There are steps that you have to be taking before you get to the final point where you may now come out with what seems to be a radical approach of trying to say that the banks being forced into one consolidated bank. Yeah, in the case of UT and Capital Bank, I followed the trend very carefully. And I saw the central bank giving them time for them to correct the shortfalls within their system, only that they couldn't comply to meet that threshold or to meet that particular condition of a healthy operating bank. Now, what is baffling me about these 5 banks that have been collapsed recently is about the issue of timing. Timing because, like I mentioned to you, at the time that UT and Capital Bank were being taken over by GCB, these banks were not performing any better significantly at all, apart from probably Unibank. These other banks, okay, Construction Bank was not in existence at that time, but these other banks were not actually in any better position significantly from Capital Bank and UT Bank. So that was why I was very, very sure that this is something that to follow. In fact, even now, others are still on the threshold, like my earlier colleague has submitted. But there is this implementation procedure that is making people suspect that there is more to the role that the central bank is playing as an independent regulator than otherwise. And here is how it goes. I told you that these banks generally were in the same position with the 2 banks. Now, UT and Capital Bank, if you look at the board of governors and those behind, the owners of these 2 banks, they are more of people who are clear sympathizers of the government in power. So now, questions people have been asking me is, does it mean that it was a deliberate action? Probably it was a party-motivated action that UT Bank and Capital Bank will support a particular party so that when we come to power, we'll find a way of not paying back and things like that. These are things that people are saying. And because I've received this from so many colleagues who want to find out whether this is possible, and given what is arising now, I just want to put it into the domain for people to also reflect on that. Okay. Now, generally, the causes of these things can be multidimensional. Some are within the industry, some are within the bank itself, and some are coming from the regulator. And even the macroeconomy itself could play a role in causing some of these things. Let me quickly just remind ourselves some of the major causes of some of these things very quickly. Some could be because of fraud and financial irregularities on the part of management and other top governance members of governance as far as these institutions are concerned. Poor corporate governance structure and management structure, where you bring in cronies, you bring in less professionals and things like that, or people who are not experienced on the job. All these things can create some of these things. And once you bring people who are not independent, they are not there by virtue of their professional expertise and experience, but rather in terms of personal relationships and chronism, you expect that the corporate structure will be there. You can see guys with even apparently or seemingly good experience or nice CV, but yet because of the nature of it, wife and husband, father and son, and things like that, you don't expect them to operate independently and with that sense of morality. Now, deficiencies in management can also be part of that, where you have people plugged in wrong rules. These things can be some of the causes of the kind of thing that you are seeing. Bad supervision from the central bank itself. So the point I just want to make is that the central bank itself, being the regulator, the regulatory forbearance cannot be taken for granted, because they are the licensees and they are supposed to be regulating and supervising the activities of these banks. And there could have been other forms of correcting some of these things in the books in terms of the way we take over some of these things as far as the current 5 banks are concerned. Uncovered exposure in the derivative markets, and sometimes these things can even be having international dimension. All these things can play a role, and that is why a strong macroeconomy backing a banking industry is very, very crucial to the survival of banks. If the macroeconomy is not at the front line performing very well with its peers internationally, you do not expect these banks to be able to do the kind of financial stability practices that must be. In other words, even this thing can lead to bad loans. And these bad loans are normally what we are referring to as the non-performing loans and things like that. People take the loans. You can do all the due diligence and all the things that people are talking about. You can do that as a banker. You can do all that. But if genuinely the person cannot pay back because the economy is not performing like others are submitted, you do all your due diligence, the guy has all the documents, he has not changed his fiscal location, everything is right, yet the government has defaulted, or a government institution or agency has defaulted in paying that particular person because probably there's a change in government. You ask the guy to put up an e-school block, and somebody has come, is not in the haste of paying the contractors, and the debt accumulates. It's not because the banker has done anything wrong in this particular case, but it's because of political practices that don't really support the banking sector. All these things could play a role. Yes, I admit the information asymmetry where depositors, in that case, you know, when we collapse or when the first 2 banks collapse, one of the things that will happen is that some of the depositors may not be able to distinguish between even a prospective solvent bank and an insolvent bank. In fact, if you read the history of bank failure, there are very good banks that have even gone insolvent because of information asymmetry, like it happened to the microfinance institutions not too long ago. Some of them were doing well, but because of what happened to DKM and such like microfinance institutions, you will see that the clients rushed for their deposit. So running for cover because you think that this is what has happened to small banks, so other small banks may act similarly. Some of these things can happen to even banks that could have stability, especially that of Unibank. They had quite a good stability in the past. So somebody would have thought that they could have survived some of these things. Now, you want us to look at the effects. So some of the effects of this action is that, one, this can lead to instability within the financial system. And instability within the financial system just means that people will lose confidence in the banking sector as far as deposit mobilization is concerned. And that will definitely increase the risk of doing business, and that will affect the real growth. So you can see the Minister of Finance can go to Parliament and say we are targeting a growth rate of so and so 4.8. Tomorrow they say 8.9 and all that. But that is just in nominal terms. In real terms, the real growth rate per capita may actually be declined or stagnant or very, very, very low, lower than even the rate of population growth rate. Now, so one of the things that we should bear in mind is that this instability may actually put the entire economy at risk as far as our interest rate and even the exchange rate is concerned. It may also lead to bad loans. It can also lead to bad loans. Bad loans because this is what is happening. People feel, or there is a recipe for people to think that if we continue to do this bailout strategy, where people establish bank or financial institutions, they mismanage, probably even deliberately, and the only way out is that the central bank will come out, the government is compelled to come and take over the bad loans by establishing a new bank or by forcing a bank that has the capacity to come and take over the bad loans. What is the agency for people to do the right thing? In fact, this applies to all jurisdictions. We call that the moral hazard. The moral hazard effect is that people will feel that, okay, there is no incentive for me to do what is right because it's like laziness. You know, if somebody wants you to sleep for you to be paid, you find it very convenient not to worry yourself. If after school you don't have a job and you are from a good house and you have brothers in Germany who send you money, some remittances regularly, what is the agency for you to be looking for a job? But if my brother here does not have such an opportunity and he's hungry, nobody will ask him to go and look for any type of odd jobs and do. And through that, he'll be more aggressive searching for a job. So the same thing happens within the financial front, where we are creating the impression that people come, take public funds, misapply, and we are forced to use our tax money to cover up for this mess. You know, when the UT and Capital Bank issue happened and they claimed, the Bank of Ghana said they were going to take the management and board of directors to account, and then they will make sure that the punitive measure, they are not going to spare any hairs and things like that. I was very, very sure that there was nothing going to happen between the two banks. For the two banks, I was very certain, especially because of the political alignment. So I was very, very sure that nothing is going to happen. And that is where I get my worry. Because my worry is that the central bank is supposed to operate as an entity that has its full autonomy. It must be independent of political interference. Now, but if they align themselves to a political party, then we are doomed, because in that case, monetary policy is not going to be independent. And the evidence is there for everybody to see. Independence of monetary policy tools and even the implementation of the policies will bring to the fore the instability within the system. It will reduce public confidence and trust in the system. It will even cause further undesirable expectations. And this will affect interest rate going higher than it is. It will affect exchange rate. It will affect inflation. Prices will not be in control. And when these things happen, you know the implications. Higher interest rates, for example, will mean that the private sector cannot have the capacity to borrow domestically. And what does that mean? It means only the government that will be able to borrow from these economies. These internal and external imbalances will cause unemployment. Even let's leave the guys that have been affected directly through the measures. But even the entire macroeconomic, because when people are not investing, low investment means low opportunity to create jobs. So these are some of the things that we have to bear in mind when we come this far.
Our time is...
Permit me a second. Just a second. Today is the burial of Jewalaka.
Oh, yeah.
So let us use this opportunity to share our condolences with the family, and then hope and believe that not only Jewalaka, But all those that have been buried today, God Himself will give them a very peaceful rest. And then again, this week, a communication came from the NDC flag staff headquarters to the effect that flag bearers can now submit their intentions and then letter of intentions, and then can go ahead and do the campaigning. I have said, and I have also said even on this platform a number of times, that my focus is to see a change of government in the 2020 elections. And so I just want to advise, particularly the NDC delegates, that as they lace their boots to go and elect a flag bearer, they should have in mind that we are not, as a nation, particularly those in opposition, we are not interested in just a flag bearer, but we are interested in someone who can win the 2020 elections. And so they shouldn't be led so much by the quest to elect just a flag bearer. They should elect someone who can win the 2020 elections for us. Oh. And then very finally, a very good afternoon to all workers of Sawis Petroleum. If you have the opportunity and you are filling your tank, try and look for Sawis. They have very
you
good
are doing publicity
there.
On my show, and it's not allowed, Mr. Wilson. You can greet him, but you are not allowed to do what you just did.
My apologies.
Yes, let me be clear about that. The show actually is brought to us by Titi Brothers and Apollonia. Apollonia City is giving big, and it's almost too good to be true. Get rewarded with cars or loads of amazing home appliances when you buy a home or plot of land in the Apollonia Mega Dash Promo. A 3-bedroom story at the Oxford gets you a brand new Suzuki Baleno from Silver Star Auto Limited to Tierraba from work. Any other home also gets you top-notch home appliances. But that's not all. You get loads of quality home appliances from simply buying a service plot in Apollonia City. There are no draws and no raffles. Exciting, isn't it? This promo is running from now to the end of September. Everyone wins in Apollonia City's Mega Dash promo. Visit www.apollonia.com.gh Mega Dash or call 0275 577 577 for more details. You can also send me email to sales@apollonia.com.ga. Terms and conditions apply. Patrick, if you could kindly get me the Daily Guide newspaper, because some people have been heckling me on social media that their preferred candidate was mentioned on the front page of the paper, and I refused to mention. But I think I mentioned all 5 who had been captured on the front page of the paper. All 4, yes. I think it's 4, yes. So, Daily Guide, for those of you out there who are heaping lots and lots of insults on me and heckling me, Daily Guide reported that NDC race begins. 5 vie for president. And the pictures that are there: John Dramani Mahama, Sylvester Mensah, Joshua Alabi, and Abraham Babin. If your candidate is not here, I did not exclude your candidate. It's Daily Guide who excluded you. So the insults must stop. Thank you very much. My name... Hashtag the insults must stop. All right. So my guests this morning have been Mr. Christopher Jr. He's the managing editor of the Insights newspaper. Mr. Emmanuel Wilson, director of communications for the PNC. Dr. Deodat Adenuchi, he's a financial analyst, and the Honorable Ahasan Esuhin was also my guest. He's a member of Parliament for Tamale North. My name is Samuel Eshem.